All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're ready to start. This is the Littleton Planning Commission. This is a special meeting, study session, continuing with our discussions about the downtown area. And it is Monday, September 27th. And if we could have a roll call, please.
Chairman Brown.
Present.
Chair Pro Tem Newfinke.
Present.
Commissioner Balkenstedt. Commissioner Coronado. Commissioner Iteraria. Yeah. Commissioner Metcalf. Commissioner Ranville.
Here.
Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
Commissioner Stravopoulos. We have 5.
We have 5, and I think that does constitute a quorum. Sorry. We've got a revised agenda in front of us. I think everybody got one. First item would be to review and consider revisions to this agenda. And if there's any suggestions, oh, yes.
I want to talk about lights.
You want to talk about
Lights.
lights? Okay.
Okay.
How about, well, what's your suggestion? You want to?
I thought we could add that under bin items if you want, because we're going to talk about bin items. So I'll hand out the list of bin items and see if this meets everybody's needs.
Yeah, that took me by surprise. I didn't know what the heck you meant by that.
Okay.
What we have currently is the second item is discussion of BIN items, and that is things that we've agreed to come back to, and we're going to try to come to some conclusion for the purposes of the comprehensive plan. And I'll read off the list of them that we have when we get to that. Does that work for you to put it in there? And if there's further discussion to be had. All right. The third item then would be discussion of upcoming meetings, dates and times, and agendas for those. And then item 4 is adjournment at or slightly before 9 o'clock, I'm sure. All right.
Should we put general timeframes to these agenda items?
Sure.
2 minutes.
50 seconds, 2 minutes, 50
Then we
seconds.
need more items. We've got, what, a dozen or so items on the bin list. Shall we, how about this? If we can accomplish some sort of consensus in 5 minutes, or whether or not we can, I'll put it that way, then we move on and try to knock off a bunch of them. Sure.
I can make a suggestion on that first one. That's probably a little bit longer because there's so many pieces to it, the sustainability goals. But other than that, I think that's probably.
Also, the handout comments, David had a chance to look at these. He knew he wasn't going to be here tonight, so he sent us some additional comments, too. So that's a set of 2. So keep both of those with you. I'll give another copy here.
Chairman,
Yes.
I have a concern where it says sustainable goals are citywide. We haven't been talking about anything else citywide other than our small area that we've been trying to work on. And I have a real hiccup about that.
Sure. And we did, we added that in kind of the discussion we were having, Sergey and I, just because as we got into thinking about sustainability, I think, what do we do for downtown by itself for sustainability that doesn't apply citywide? So that's where we got it. Yeah, exactly.
And I am concerned about that because if I see this all citywide, I'd say, scratch all of them until we get to the citywide issue, and let's deal with only the city.
And that's where we wanted to go with that discussion. Is that what you want to do, or is there something that applies just to downtown?
Well, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And these items here, we did some searching on the web as to what kinds of sustainability goals other cities have. And this is generally things that we can look at and say, do we want to include that? Do we not want to include that? And if so, how? Because we can certainly cross anything here that's on here off. This is not a suggested list, let me put it that way. Or we can add something, but we thought that we wanted to look at what other cities are doing in terms of sustainability and what it means, because I think sustainability is one of those catch-all words that sometimes people don't know what you're talking about. So I think we need to get to a point where we define what it is for Littleton, perhaps define what it is for downtown and call it good, and then understand that as we add other chapters to the comprehensive plan, it may make some sense when they're all done to pull those, some of the ones that apply to the whole city up into the front of the document, and then have specific ones for the various neighborhoods associated there.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable about what you just said, only because of the fact that it seems like, our goal, to the best of my knowledge, is that we're supposed to be focusing in on the downtown and the downtown only and try to finish that. If sustainable goals are citywide, then I think we need to take it off the table for, unless there's something that's really jumps out of these whatever, and there's only one that comes to my mind that really jumps out, that's lighting. Only because of the fact I found it abused at the last minute.
And I think we can do a much better job with sustainability, addressing it citywide rather than neighborhood by neighborhood.
I agree with you, totally, but.
Jenny?
I wonder if there is something that says that this is what we're looking at while the focus is on the central area, that what takes place in the central area is going to influence what happens citywide. And maybe that's a way to...
To that point, I think, I'm not overstating it, I think we, at council's direction, we started in the downtown area here. Mm-hmm. And I think we had a discussion early on and realized that when we got this area updated for some of the current trends, that some of those elements would translate to other areas. And not only as far as the style of what we put together, things that we add, areas that we really spend a lot of time giving consideration to. And so I believe what we concluded was once we got some of the areas solved, a new comprehensive plan draft, at the very least, that we would see issues that we would put in a citywide type of overview. And so I guess with that being said, I think we do want to focus, if we talk about sustainability, it's what does it mean downtown? And one element that comes to mind is the historical preservation of buildings. Most of the historic buildings are in the downtown area as opposed to, say, some of the more recent neighborhoods. There are, of course, districts, a couple other historic districts in other neighborhoods, but that's the exception rather than the rule. So I don't think, I guess I'm not in favor of discussing sustainability on a citywide basis now. Whatever elements we consider for downtown translate to other areas eventually. It's probably one of the more ubiquitous things, sort of like lighting, although downtown has its own lighting dynamics, as we've discovered. Here's somebody that knows something about lighting and landscape architecture. Craig made it, thank you. Okay. Do we want to, I don't know, was there general agreement? Craig, Dennis, you've got copies.
Yeah, I'll put together a packet for him.
We've got a revised agenda, Craig, and then we've got copies of a couple things that David sent, knowing that he wouldn't be here tonight. We're just getting started on our second item, the list. Let me just read down through these things, and I don't know that they're in any particular order. It started with sustainability goals are citywide, and we kind of delved into that, and we want to limit our discussion, I think, by agreement to the downtown area related to sustainability, and then we'll see how later in the process that translates. Mix of uses, down here we have all sorts of different zones, zoning designations and uses. Intermittent scale.
Yeah, these were things that we were thinking, if we were thinking about what would a plan talk about in terms of sustainability, these were the list that kind of is following sustainability. We thought you would address in terms of sustainability. And when we looked at those are why we're thinking, those look like citywide issues rather than a downtown issue. Although we could talk about, the mix of uses downtown, a sustainable issue. So if you want to talk about sustainability for downtown specifically, some of these things may work. The intimate scale, emphasis on non-motorized transportation, dense urban development, public transportation, building designs that conserve energy, use of solar power, minimizing use of non-renewable resources in buildings, a variety of housing choices, the proximity and availability of parks, trails, and open space, water use and quality, and air quality. All those are things that we said, those are elements of sustainability, and those may apply downtown specifically, or you may want to pull some of those out specifically. Whereas we were thinking, generally, you think sustainability in a larger format, larger area. So, but we really want some direction in terms of how do you want to go on that? Do you want to talk about items that are specific to downtown, or do you want to pull it back and say it's something we're going to deal with later when we talk about the city as a whole, or do we want to put that in the kind of the citywide bin that we would kind of put together to hear things that will come back?
So we have nothing in the plan at this point about sustainability.
And I think a lot of these subject areas we're talking about in the actual comprehensive plan, for example, the variety of housing choices, the mix of uses, the urban environment, a lot of those we're actually including in, well, I'm guessing, it's being included in the plan under our various sections.
Well, that's kind of what we were thinking too, is that this is kind of, and we've had that discussion here, I think, in terms of, it's kind of worked throughout the entire plan. It actually kind of, rather than pulling it out specifically, it really kind of is incorporated into everything you've been talking about. So, but we didn't know if you were comfortable with that.
I do like having something in our comprehensive plan, especially that calls attention to that we are thinking about sustainability and we're thinking about it in this way. And I mean, these are what's out there as far as sustainability. Dense urban development makes obviously the most sense in a downtown setting, like downtown Littleton in our central area plan. As you go away from the downtown center, it's denser, or it's less dense. So there is a transition that happens. The other thing, emphasis on non-motorized transportation is good. The other thing is public transportation is usually one of those sustainability items too. I mean, we already have it built into our, we already have it here in Littleton, so I guess it's something that maybe we're not mentioning, but we are connecting to it, the connectivity of the public transportation. And so that I think would also perhaps want to show up on the sustainability goals as well.
How about, go ahead, Julio.
The more we speak about this, I guess the more I'm going to say it in this manner. Going over all the stuff that we have gone over in the last 2 years, even with the central area, a lot of what we have talked about are these elements already. So I guess my comment to Sarah Jane and to Dennis is, you already have a lot of this. It's probably stuff that it's in your data that you've already received from us. So I guess my comment to you is to incorporate sustainability into those elements that we've already talked about without having us to regurgitate or go over this thing one more time. Because, I hate to say it, but after about the 5th or 6th time, it gets kind of tiring. And I just don't, I'm not opposed to it, but, if you have a hiccup about it, that's one thing. But
We're just looking for direction.
But at this point in time, we talked about all of these things, through the last year and a half that I know of.
Yeah, I guess the only question we had was, do we want to, kind of what Jenny suggested, is have some statement in there that talks specifically about sustainability, or do we want to just build it throughout?
That's my comment.
So,
I'd rather
okay.
let you guys
Okay.
figure that out and then let us know how you did it, and we'll either agree with you or disagree.
Okay.
But I don't think, whatever occurs, whatever change would happen from that point would be minimal, I think.
How about this, in the editing process, sort of in the style of the perhaps introduction in some of the other sections, that the sustainability portion just references other considerations, whether it be in the parks and trails and connectivity and things like that, sort of a vision statement.
Yeah, we might do it in the introduction or in the vision statement, something, yeah, somewhere along the way in terms of.
So it's just
Okay.
an overview or a acknowledgement. Does that sound good? Then if there's suggestions from commissioners of, oh, here, we need a paragraph about this relating to one of these elements, then we can talk about that later.
From my standpoint, it'd be a lot easier once we see the draft document that you're talking about and you're working on. I think the fact that you brought up sustainability, I think is important. However, I guess my comment is, with all the information you currently have, you're not going to offend me whichever way you go by putting it into, I think we're still warming up to the term sustainability. I don't even think we're totally there and saying this is what it is.
Right.
And I think that that's what this complet is going to show when it goes to the public and we get feedback and everything else. Because we have a lot of other folks to grow with us on this whole thing. And I don't want to come to any, conclusions at this point in time, because that's even tougher to argue for sometimes. Because then you got to go back and redocument everything you've done for the last 2 years.
Does that offer enough direction without going into?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start there. Second item, what is the problem we are trying to solve with expanding home occupation standards, ADUs, which is accessory dwelling units, increased percentage?
This was from something that it looked like Pavlos may have written it, and this is basically what it said, that we need to address the problems with home occupation standards. We need a larger percentage, and then the sentence ended. We need to be able to have ADUs be part of a home business, I think was part of that. So I just didn't know what he meant. It's not.
Well, I think you put Pablo's name on there when you see him and can ask him a question.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for Pablo.
Okay.
And we hadn't heard any other issues, particularly with home occupations downtown particularly. We have had issues, I think, just in terms of process. I think when people change from residential to a commercial use, there's a fairly substantial process you have to go through in terms of saying, okay, suddenly you've got a different set of standards you have to make because you're no longer a residence. You actually have people come into your office, and you're not even a home occupation. You're beyond that. So you have employees, and you need parking, and you've got standards you have to meet. And so there's a process with that. And so that's the only thing we thought of that may have come up as an issue, but we haven't heard anything specific. I don't think we've talked anything about anything specific in our meetings. So
I see ADUs being talked about in a lot of other the residential areas that we haven't talked
residential
about.
areas, but I don't think there's a
For
need downtown.
not
Yeah.
really. I don't see that big of an issue. Now, I may be wrong. I mean,
I don't think so either, because we've got, every district we have here allows multifamily,
Yeah.
including the Northwest neighborhood allows that.
I mean, if it can't happen here, it won't happen anywhere.
Right, yeah.
My recollection on that was, as far as expansion of the home occupation standards, was that it might have been a little bit obsolete in the way it was worded. The types of occupations were targeted to, in the central area, to certain professions that could be more broadly covered with different words, perhaps, allowing for, instead of just medical and dental, maybe it's architectural, other types of offices that have similar space needs and parking needs and that type of thing.
Then I have a question for you. Because in essence, you're talking about R5 again. And I guess my comment is, and this is where I think I disagreed even with what I heard at the last meeting about what was going on with the lighting, caught my attention. My primary goal for the R5 is for it to remain residential, not to incentivize it to be only commercial. And I guess that's a differentiation of point of view. Those of you that want to see more commercial in there, I expect to hear that part of it, but I guess I'm going, I think that's a real cultural residential area that I'd like to see maintained personally. And I could care less if we see anything in there that's, because one, the streets can't, it's proven to me, streets can't accommodate it, sidewalks can't accommodate it, and unless you're going to do a bunch of scrape-offs, which I'm not for, that's not the way I want to go. I mean, I think there's plenty of the room in the city to accommodate a lot of the things that you're talking about. That's just.
And actually, I think we had this discussion before.
We've
and
had it,
That's
yeah,
why we had
that's
the
what I'm saying,
task
we
force.
keep going back.
And this is my recollection of why that issue came up.
No, I understand, but I just, we play this game kind of over and over again.
Is there any support for expanding the variety of allowable offices, professional offices downtown? I think it's pretty much related to medical now.
Well, actually, with a home occupation, you can do any kind of office typically.
I guess the
Yeah,
question,
so-
I think we need to be specific, because I keep looking at that map over your shoulder, and, and that lot of, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care what you do to the red area, but I'm going to take some issue when you start getting into the R5 area again. And I need some differentiation in speech when we talk about, let's not overgeneralize, because that's where I think we get in trouble. I mean, like I said, I'm all for, commercializing the hell out of that whole downtown area all the way to the college as far as I'm concerned. And again, I go back to my original comment. What's downtown? Mm-hmm. We still haven't defined that. After 2 years, I'm still saying the same thing.
If I recall from the survey and the public meeting over at Hudson Gardens, the sentiment of residents, whether they're in the R5 or they're just downtown, or people that came in to talk about downtown, was that the part that looked residential should continue to look residential and be residential. And there's a few medical offices, the dentist's office that we've discussed recently. Some of those go way back, and that's probably why they're allowed.
Well, actually, it isn't allowed. Medical and dental offices aren't allowed use, and so it's one of the discussions I think we need to have. Is that something you're comfortable with, that there could be additional medical and dental offices in that neighborhood? And if not, we need to have a recommendation in the plan to change that and go to strictly residential. Or do you want to limit the size of them, allow them, but say maybe there's a certain square footage that they could accommodate, but that's a maximum? Are there other limitations that you think might be appropriate? Or are you comfortable that there might be more of those in the neighborhood? But we really need some direction on that. So, because this is the time, I think, for us to kind of say, yeah, we've had some experience now, and we can kind of really say, yeah, we're comfortable, we're not comfortable. So.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I guess Craig and I both worked on a regulation for that R5, and I think you ought to resurrect that so that we can look at it one more time as a group, because even since then, we might, I may become much more conservative than when I was, even when I initially worked on it.
Let's set that one aside then. That's when we have it.
We'll bring that back next time.
I guess to answer the question that's posed here, is the problem conversion from home to office? I would argue that yes, it is in the R5. Elsewhere, I would say there might be a different answer. That perhaps we're wanting to encourage a better mix of use, or a more downtown appropriate, central area appropriate mix of uses by encouraging additional home office. That would be my opinion.
But, and Jen, my impression is that the home occupation is pretty open in terms of what you can do with home occupation. It just says general op. You can't have employees. And you can't have signage, and you can't have it. You have to use the same entrance. But so it's more kind of the parameters that it looks residential rather than the type of office you have. You just can't have employees there, so it has to be. And the signage is, yeah. Right. So,
So it's even actually more restrictive than in the R5 where employees are allowed and signage isn't.
yes. Well, employees are allowed in the R5 if you are medical or dental, but no other offices. But those are the only two you can have. Whereas the CA, you can have any office with employees and the signage. So right now, you could, in the R5, you could have a home occupation or you could have medical and dental. But if you're a home occupation, you have those limitations on you. If you have medical and dental, you don't. And so that's part of the discussion, I think, when we come back next time and look at your proposed language. Okay.
But part of that, those issues that you brought up, because it's covered by the PDO process, I don't know, maybe another medical or dental would be okay, but 30 more would be problematic, and that's going to, come up.
I even question that, because I think, see, one of the things I'm not willing to see happen is somebody do a scrape off of one of those buildings for a new medical to meet the 10,000 square feet or the 900, whatever it is, the number just below 10,000 so that it can meet it. I don't know if I'm for that. I think consciously in my mind, I look at the red area that you have there, the primary area of that is commercial with residential, and I see the R5 residential with some commercial, limited commercial, I guess, is the way I look at it. And I don't see anything, it's going to take a lot of, well, I'm not going to change my mind about it. I think that, I just, after doing this for almost 2 years or 2.5 years, maybe longer, I have come to the conclusion that, I'm not willing to jeopardize the uniqueness and culture that currently exists in that R5 area. Even though it's called R5, higher density and all that stuff, I have my own reservations of even calling it that. But certainly that red area between, Main Street and halfway up and all the way down to the college, if you guys want to do commercial, residential, and I don't care how you want to do it, and you go up to your 40 feet or whatever, more power to you. I'm all for that, but I don't see it the other way.
So let's reconsider let's maybe redistribute what you guys came up with about the R5. There are other residential, mostly rental, I think, in some sites have been already approved in previous hearings to be, as you say, scraped off, demolished, like down the site.
Nothing else. Nothing else in the R5, though.
No.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Nothing else in the R5.
Nothing else in the
But this statement is applicable to all of the
Right.
downtown area that we're considering.
And I'm not even so sure I'd do another Nevada place with the way things are today if I was to see it again. And I wasn't even there for that vote, but I'm still saying.
All right, so we'll revisit that. Pedestrian and bicycle modes will be encouraged. And David had a comment about language such as encouragement and so on not being definitive enough. If I can read into what he was saying. I guess after considering that, there's some things that we want to be very definitive about, and other things we just want to give a sense of what we're looking for. We're not putting down the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not and thou shall. Some of these things, particularly where there's a PDO, various elements may come together to make it agreeable. And so I think sort of subjective statements.
I think it's more than, I think my bigger concern is the fact that I think that, we need to start thinking about this a little bit. Again, what came to mind at the last meeting during the presentation, you have it down further. There's a number of things we need to do, which is all within, that which is in the right-of-way or that which is in private. But I'm going to just say right-of-way and public. Create a downtown parking management plan. That might be a public structure, for all I know, okay? But private, you can't, you know, if you're going to do private, you have to hook it up to a use. In other words, X use is going to create a necessity for so much off-street parking. That's within the code. Everything else on the street, you know, it's either parallel parking, you know, angle parking, or any other kind of parking, but we haven't determined what that is because we haven't done a plan for that, or where the excess public parking should be. I talk about that. I also say that we need to do a pedestrian and bike plan. Again, that's going to be on the public right-of-way. It's not going to be on private roadways. I mean, that's, in a way, that's, you know, and we need to embellish that as a plan, not something that an applicant's going to do.
Public Services did get funding for that through Tri-County Health, so they actually are working with Tri-County to put together an RFP to go out for proposals to get a consultant to do that. So they'll be doing a citywide bicycle pedestrian plan rather than just downtown.
And actually, on the pedestrian bicycle plan that I'm curious about, and will you give us continual updates on that as far as the status?
Sure.
And then will we have an opportunity to review it at stages of basically the process of going through it?
I think probably, initially, I think what they would anticipate is that you would all be invited to the public meeting, and then we could come back and discuss it, so.
Okay.
And see
So
how
there will
it
be
fits.
some public meetings
Right.
that will be
Yeah.
along the
Well,
way.
I'd go a step farther. I
Great.
want whatever that is, as a plan, either city-wise or proportionate to wherever we are, that we adopt that portion of the plan into the comp plan, so that it becomes part of the comprehensive plan. I think there's been a couple of things that have been done over the course of time that have a tendency of going on their own, drifting away into the ether, and we never really see it. I'd like to see us look at it, have public meetings on it, and approve it, or deny it, or whatever we decide to do. And we do that for, like I say, parking, pedestrian trails, and all that kind of good stuff, and lighting. I think that it's time. And I think those are issues that are, if you want to put it into a bin that's kind of citywide, that's where I put all that stuff in. And it's reflective of the entire city and not just, you know.
Should be integrated. David had a great statement regarding, he had it under sidewalks, widths, and parking places, which is a couple items down. He simply stated it this way: sidewalks should be appropriate to setting loads and conflicts. I think we recognized last time that it might not be better to have a 5-foot wide sidewalk and lose 2 parking places. We asked DRC to reconsider that, but I like that statement that he came up with. And whether I guess I would like that in the comprehensive plan for the downtown area. On Main Street, we have very wide, comfortable sidewalks.
Can I ask where you're seeing that?
He sent me his comments, and I was reading from that. I think
So the second paragraph on the second page, top of the same page.
Oh, sidewalks.
Sidewalks, widths.
Got it.
I can't find it on, oh, no.
Sorry.
Yeah, here we are.
It's the
Yep.
second, yeah.
Okay. I'm working off a copy I printed out earlier, so it's not organized the same way. Yep, sidewalks should be appropriate to settings, loads, and conflicts. And I think that is specific enough to indicate that one size doesn't fit all. Is there some general consensus that that's a good statement, that that's specific enough?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah. What is, I guess the way I'd put it as an example, the sidewalks over on Alamo should be more like the sidewalks on Main Street if Alamo becomes developed to the point that it is like Main Street, with lots of storefronts and retail and so on.
That's exactly what I'm trying
Who's
to get at.
determining what's appropriate? Charlie, based on his lighting
Well,
scenario? I'm not sure that he'd be the one to determine.
if it came to us as a PDO, I suppose the city attorney indicated that in the public right-of-way, we don't have the jurisdiction, but we could approve or turn down, if Julio wants to weigh in. Go ahead.
I need to weigh in on that because I think that, again, the Planning Commission does have the right to review any and all plans, be it even in the right-of-way for the city of Littleton, and make recommendations, and especially if we request to put them all in the comp plan. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think what's, again, and I think I don't know what the city attorney will agree with me on that, but the bottom line is, from all of my background, we as a planning commission are the filter to see all that stuff, to make it public. Otherwise, what happens is it could be done in a back room, nobody knows about it, it only comes up at key times, and it's applied on a helter-skelter basis. That's my problem with it, and that's what ticked me off so much at the last meeting, when I found out that a plan that was 23 years old that nobody's seen. And I have a real issue with that.
Well, I don't have an issue with the Planning Commission reviewing that and putting that in the comp plan. I think the comp plan is the guiding document that would then, having been adopted by council, in addition to the Planning Commission, give guidance to public services and other departments that would carry out things in the right-of-way. But my issue is when you say we could vote against it because of what's happening in the right-of-way, is essentially you're holding it against an applicant because the city is requiring him to pay into a lighting fund or to improve the sidewalk or to widen the street or whatever the issue is. It's not the applicant's issue, essentially.
I totally agree with that.
And so to say we could always vote it down is essentially to say, let's take something outside our criteria, which is the road or the lighting or the sidewalk, not within the criteria that you have in front of you, and deny this application based on that. Then you are outside of your criteria, and the decision can't be supported by the record. And so I agree that you can certainly have a say, and I understood the commissioner's points last time about the lighting plan, but I think that that is best addressed in your comp plan. And then it's up to the rest of the city staff to follow through in the comp plan. Just like if you're doing a comp plan on tourism or something else, it wouldn't be for the planning commission to then carry out the plan. There are different people once the plan is in place. But I disagree with any commissioner that would say, I'm going to vote against this plan because I don't like what public services has required. I mean, this came up in another context at a meeting where we talked about when the applicant was going to pay the fees. And that was another one where I think the fee was being continued out until some other time in the code, and the Planning Commission wanted to know when was the fee going to be paid. I mean, that doesn't really matter to the Planning Commission. That's not in your criteria. You don't need to be looking out for those kinds of issues that are outside of what has been given to you in the form of legislation to look at. And anytime a court reviews your case, they're just going to look at your 9 criteria. Boom, boom, boom. What did we have in the record to support these 9? If we have 3 commissioners up there saying, I don't like what Charlie Bloston has required in the lighting, I'm going to vote against it, then, you know, that's going to get overturned. That's going to get remanded back to the Planning Commission, and the court's going to say, do not consider this the next time around. So that's really what I'm trying to protect against. I'm not saying butt out, it's none of your business. I'm just saying that there is a time and a place for that. And during a zoning application, that's where we get into the difference that, you know, Julio sometimes talks over my head too when he gets into this zoning versus land use. But that's really what we're talking about, the practical application versus the land use and what we're doing in a comp plan. So
in the comp plan, the way we're looking at it too, I think, is to give the direction in terms of what's the vision for downtown, how do we want to achieve it. And so direction in terms of the lights or the sidewalks or the street width or the bicycles or anything else should be based on that. Is this consistent with that character you're trying to create or not consistent with that character you're trying to create and the land uses you're trying to engender? So I think keep it in that kind of framework, and I think we're fine.
So does that statement work for the commissioners as something we could reference, again, say in the R5 or in front of any small-scale residential or, professional office, that this needs to have a residential look because it's in a residential area? For sidewalks, for instance, they need to be appropriate, and that would be where we would come back and say, well, we don't agree with this PDO because we don't think the sidewalks are appropriate for here or the lighting is appropriate for here, if I understand the...
I think you're, again, in my mind, you're crossing over a threshold that I don't know. I think what we have to do, and I'll just repeat it from that standpoint, is that we have the ability to ask for plans, be either lighting and a differentiation for what you want to see in a residential versus a commercial. Like say along Main Street, you say, you want to see, currently there is X amount of width on Main Street, okay? And unless we really decide that we're going to eliminate all cars and everything else, but if we're going to leave it just the way it is today, okay, it is X amount of street or sidewalk is there. And if we want to do something like that on Alamo, that may be our guideline for what we want to see. That's part of our plan that we have created for the downtown core as it progresses in time. Because it may not be on Alamo that way. It might be a 2-foot for all I know. But we don't want to change the character. If we still want 2 lanes and all that other stuff, and that becomes an issue that we get information on, we may have to limit it to that 2 feet because we still want to maintain the same type of circulation that currently exists. I mean, that's kind of a roundabout way of doing it, but we can't say hell no to this person because of one thing or another. I mean, even on the zoning, we can deal with uses and setbacks, but unless the city comes up with a formalized, thou shalt in commercial do 20 feet of sidewalk, and that's what Charlie lives with, and he and I say Charlie, it could be the whole city for that matter. I'm just using Charlie as a reference because of Public Works Director. But anyway, the point being, though, is, we have to understand that. Our goal is to look at it from an overview, and that's what I'm trying to stay at. Like I say, everything in red, like I said earlier, can be heavy on the commercial and light on the residential as far as I'm concerned. Or everything on the first floor is commercial and everything above it is residential. I mean, that's a simple statement, but it carries through the whole downtown area.
Just kind of going back with, it sounds like there's a certain character, and I mean, obviously a residential sidewalk is different in width than a commercial sidewalk, and then Main Street sidewalk versus Curtis Street sidewalk. So there's a hierarchy to our sidewalk widths. And so when Linda and I were getting into the circulation, we had a lot of detail. We pulled it out and put it in the implementation notes, and we started to try to talk about what our primary pedestrian and bicycle connector streets, looking at obviously Main Street, Alamo, Prince, Rio Grande, Church, Curtis. So there's a hierarchy. And so I think, even when I think about the sidewalks, is that you'd want to focus on the main ones first, like Alamo, and perhaps, and some of the connectors. If we're trying to connect between Arapahoe Community College and Main Street, you may look at Curtis as a hierarchy, as that's important. So whereas some of the R5 sidewalks is not as important as the hierarchy goes as far as what the city should be emphasizing and focusing on. So I guess, and also accessibility is important when we're talking about getting around on the streets. And so as much as possible, where we can try to get a width that's accessible for wheelchairs and also strollers as well, and so that people can move throughout the city in a way that is, it's welcoming. It's not continually running into a barrier or a block in the middle of the sidewalk. As obviously, because we have an older city, there's things that are in place, but to see that there's a hierarchy and to try to do what we can based on the situation and the scenario that we're looking at. And I think that's what we're, so I guess the hierarchy I think is important to the widths and the priorities as far as which streets do we need to really do first, second. And then I think what we're going to find is that the priority of the residential sector is probably much further down the line than looking at our commercial areas and making sure that people can get around those first. And then, but also still think about, well, we've got residential areas, we've got to bring people to those commercial areas. What are going to be the main routes that people are going to take? That's an area then we will look at to address the sidewalk more so than maybe some of the other streets that are less likely to be feeder streets into downtown.
Talking about redoing sidewalks in the absence of redevelopment. So some of that is associated with what might happen next door also. Doesn't do particularly much good to widen sidewalks one property. So I think that's where
I think that it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the pedestrian bicycle master plan. They may come up with that kind of recommendation. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of the public process on that. But
Well, and part of it could be ADA related too, because if you do a certain improvement, I mean, you can have a narrow sidewalk or a non-ADA compliant property forever, as long as you don't improve it. But the minute you improve it, then all those new ADA standards kick in, and you may have a situation where one person, because of the types of improvements they're doing to the property, is now going to be required to put in this sidewalk or a ramp or whatever it is that might not be in the character of everything else around it because everything else around it hasn't developed. So, I mean, those kinds of issues are why I just caution the Planning Commission to stay sort of broad when we talk about that in terms of the comp plan, that when we talk about character of the neighborhood, we mean, you know, narrow sidewalks, wide streets, whatever it is, but not to get so specific that we're defining those because, you know, those are really not necessarily in the control of the applicant. And so even what, Norm, you said earlier about once we have it in the comp plan, then maybe we could turn it, or we could use that as part of our criteria. You really can't use it as part of your criteria unless the council were to say, you Planning Commission, this is now part of your criteria, is how wide the street's going to be. And by doing that, they would essentially be giving over the powers that they have given to the Public Services Department and making the Planning Commission the overseer of that department. And they have not gone there. And so Public Services takes care of those issues and considers them somewhat, quote, technical issues, even though I think that they cross over to some extent. But I would just say that because we don't really know what all those standards are until we get the application and we've done the engineering, that yours should stay very conceptual. And to that extent, I wouldn't get into when are we going to widen a sidewalk, because you don't know how the law is going to change. We don't know what the engineering is on each particular property. There's just a lot of other issues in there that we can't control.
I think one way to resolve a number of these items on here with respect to streets and bicycles and sidewalks is to, if we were to, as part of the comp plan for the central area, adopt the complete street policy, which we heard about at the presentation last week, and it allows quite a bit of flexibility. It's been tested nationally. It allows a lot of flexibility in addressing streets when they're reconstructed to accommodate the various modes. Seems like that, you know, without getting into a lot of specifics, that's a recommendation that certainly I could support. I'd be interested to hear what the other commissioners think about that, or if there are questions about what that is.
Will the complete streets policy continually change with the times? I mean, it's not something that's static, it's going to continually change.
Good.
As I understand it, it's a performance-based standard, so as new best practices become available, it can be adapted to that. It's a flexible standard. It's just a policy that says when streets are reconstructed that it doesn't just consider the needs of automobiles, that it considers the needs of pedestrians and other modes of transportation as well.
I'm interested as well in the complete streets and seeing that we look at the bigger picture, not just focusing on the vehicles.
I think there's means within, adopting that policy to have a ped and bike master plan that identifies a hierarchy of streets specific to the city. But the policy would just sort of blanket an area. It doesn't even have to be citywide. It could be just for the central area.
Based on what you said, I think 3 of the sections probably relate to that. How would we incorporate the complete streets as a separate section of the comprehensive plan? Or
I think it would just be a goal, or it would be a policy outcome of a goal.
It would probably be under the circulation network.
Okay, put something under circulation network as far as review provisions of complete streets, or
It would simply say adopt a complete streets policy for the central area, I would think.
But I don't know if you would do that in the form of a comp plan. I don't know. I would have to look at it closer. I don't know enough about the information to really make a judgment call at this point in time. I'd love to see more about that.
I can find more for the next meeting.
That's another thing.
do that.
Just,
so the R5 and the complete streets are something that we want to look at.
There's many other municipalities that are moving toward that if they haven't already. I think Sarah Jane, you
Yeah, I know. The work I've done in Colorado Springs and Fort Collins, and I think Denver.
I think Denver's moving toward one now. Yeah.
And Boulder, certainly. But I know in Colorado Springs, it's part of their policy, and it's part of their comprehensive.
Are they each revising it to their own needs, or are they taking a policy, a complete streets policy, and saying, this is what we're using across the board?
It's not measurements. It's kind of a philosophy that you're going to.
So there's no mandates in the complete
No.
streets that you must do this and you must do that?
Well, you need to accommodate pedestrians, bicycles, non-motorized
So there's
vehicles.
mandates in that you
And-
have to do certain things.
Yeah, but for example, I can tell you how it works out. I'm working on Woodman Road down in the Springs, if any of you are familiar with that, which currently has no bike lanes and no sidewalks on it. And when it's reconstructed, it will have a bike lane and it will have sidewalks. And that's part of their complete streets because they were able to do it. There are places where the street accommodates bicycles as part of a general travel lane because there simply isn't room to add an additional 5 feet without encroaching on the property lines too much, or there just simply isn't room because of the urban development. But it guides the planning team to accommodate all modes of traffic, not just traffic. And a lot of the streets in the Springs, which is quite a lot of sprawl and suburban development happened to the north rather quickly, and I don't think that they thought that through, and now they're having to go back and readapt them when it's time to fix the street anyway. They don't just say, okay, this street has no sidewalk, we have to go do it, but when it's redeveloped. That's how it works.
And Kurt, I think to your question about mandates, my understanding of it is the mandate is that accommodations be considered, not necessarily implemented, that the outcome of it is not necessarily bike lanes and even sidewalks on every street, but that they be considered for every street that's reconstructed.
that'd be an interesting question to see from the folks that live in Aberdeen Village and whether or not they want to see sidewalks now versus when they haven't had any for 40, 50
Well,
years.
and it might be interesting to see what the discussion's been in Denver, because they have neighborhoods very similar to that.
Point. I think
Yeah,
it'd be really
where
interesting.
it's really the character of the neighborhood is largely defined by the fact they don't have sidewalks, and so no curbs, no gutters, it's just that kind of stuff even in some cases. So it'd be interesting to see where that discussion's gone.
I think it's going to be a real interesting conversation when you decide to pick on that area of the city. Because I agree. I mean, that'd be the first thing out of my mouth. Do they want to have sidewalks and gutters and all that stuff? Now that they've been there forever, they still want to see it continue. Who knows?
But they have a more generous street width, and particularly the historic areas. So it's
Well, that's
not,
the beauty of where they live. Yeah.
and it probably looks, without curb and gutter, it probably looks larger as you drive down, and perhaps it feels comfortable nonetheless. Okay, so the complete streets probably takes care of the pedestrian and bicycle mode item, sidewalks and widths and parking spaces priorities item, and maybe downtown urban design framework. It gets into that too, would you say? We've kind of skipped over this one. It says changes to TIZ, that's the transit.
And that's probably B5 that we mentioned.
Right, B5. Yeah,
Yep,
CA.
several categories there.
And the question on that was the time limit. We don't have anything now, and we're looking around, and we look some of these, and it wouldn't be the TIZ, the B5, or the CA, it's more the PDO. Should there be a time limit on some of those? The sunset, is that possible?
And
is that something
explain
that's
what you mean by that.
Well, the
because-
thought is that we have some areas in the city, and not necessarily downtown, but other areas, but it could come up downtown as well. For example, the senior project across the street. That runs with the land. The approval that you gave on that 2 years ago now.
Clarify that
Sure.
particular property. There was the previous PDO really approved of the 3-story,
4-story, right, wasn't it? First one? First one was 4, and then went to 3.
And then that senior facility came in asking for approval on that property. But it went away, and that never got recorded. So basically, what's reverted back to that approval is that other PDO that had.
The 4-story one is what still exists on the land. The 3-story never got it. So the question is, at some point, would it be appropriate for the city to reconsider that, or for that to go through automatically, or for them to have to come back? And Jan and Suzanne, I don't know what the legal parameters of that are, but it's just a question that's come up. Julio, did you want to?
I'd like to take a stab at that because of my history when I was working in Oregon. Could do a rezoning. If the dirt wasn't turned in 2 years, we're back to the existing zoning.
The original zoning?
The original zoning.
Okay.
Now, saying that, because of the fact I'm a county planner and have been working on that, they don't do that very well in the county jurisdictions, but because you all are city, what I would say, home rule, as a result of that, you can do just about anything you want. You can implement anything you want. You can almost do any kind of zoning you want, so you can be as creative as you want. So timelines and sunsets are no big deal at all when it comes to zoning.
Denver had a provision for a long time, and I think it's gone away at this point, but where the city council would consider after a certain period going back and rezoning.
We used to have it, and it was
But
beautiful.
it had to be city council that would do it. It didn't automatically revert, but they actually could take action.
We got it to the point where it automatically reverted after 2 years. If they didn't turn a blade of grass or anything, now they could get extensions. Only if, they did an extension. If they didn't do an extension, they said, we forgot or whatever, then they have to go back to the process, and then we'd go through and deal with it.
Extension take anything other than just refiling or
Just a letter.
Just a letter saying.
It was pretty simple. I mean, the idea was that we didn't want it to just go away, but if they had some kind of a reasoning that they didn't get around to it, or, financing or whatever, and all that kind of good stuff took a little bit longer, we're accountable to that. But there's no reason why you can't do, because you're home rule, you have all the latitude in the world.
I'd be open to having some kind of a sunset, but with the caveat that they could come in and extend that out, simply for economic times that we're in right now. Those things that got approved 2 years ago are not going to happen. If I had $1 for every time somebody asked me what's going on at Marathon, I wouldn't be
Yeah, I can do that too.
Yes. Jan, you want to talk a little bit about the process that you can extend, can be extended? You want to talk a little bit about the processes that can be extended, the approvals that can be extended at this point, that there is a provision for certain things currently?
Yeah, certain things. Well, basically, the two things that can go through an administrative type time extension that we have in the code are site development plans, because those have to be recorded and a permit has to be issued within 1 year of its approval. Otherwise, they have to get a time extension by the DRC. And that's limited to 1 year time extension, but there's no limit on how many time extensions they could get. Then the only other thing in the code that has a time extension on it is the preliminary plat approval. 'Cause that's good for 6 months. I mean, a final plat has to be applied for within 6 months of that approval. If that doesn't happen, the applicant can request of Planning Commission a 6-month time extension, but only 1. And those are the only 2 processes we have that have a time extension. The rest of them, the PDO, the PD plan, and the final subdivision plats all have to be recorded within 1 year of their approval in order to retain their approval. That's on recording, yeah, and that's in the code, but there's no time limit as to when they don't have any time limit to starting the project. I mean, they can, because I know when I came to work here, I mean, we had these PDs and stuff, and some site plans had been approved for 10 years, and then now all of a sudden they were going to build them, and it was kind of...
Well, that's the situation I find in the county, because we had a number of them that have been zoned for 20 years, and decided to plot them later on, and there's, because the county has not only the county, but the state of Colorado, at least for statutory regulations, is pretty strict on that, and we didn't have a choice. We had to pretty much honor it. I mean, it leans toward development and is pro-development in that regard. It incentivizes the property owner that has that land use to proceed. But again, because you're home rule, you can go any way you want, as long as, of course, your city council agrees to it.
Suzanne, you want to chime in on home rule and what that allows us to do? And
Well, I mean, we could have a reversion type clause if we wanted to. I mean, I think we just would want to think about the consequences, because that's kind of a double-edged, sometimes you get a more progressive zoning, maybe you get a subdivision improvement agreement that provides you a lot of improvements that you wanted, and if it were to revert back, there may be uses on the property that you didn't want. For instance, if you rezone a piece of property, let's say that Marathon used to be industrial, and we have a PD plan on it. Now, maybe the PD is not going to get developed, but what if it reverted back to industrial, and now it sits in the middle of a bunch of houses, and somebody actually decided, let's put some uses there, like a glue factory, whatever, that can go in an industrial zone, and is that really what you want? And now you don't get the improvements, and,
Or a porn shop.
A porn shop is always my example of what can go in an industrial zone, but, so you need to think about, is that, I think we even have an applicant now who's saying, can I revert back on that subdivision where they did 4 and now they wish they had 2, because the 4 that they signed on for requires curb and gutter and all this other stuff, and if they could just go back to the initial zoning, then they could develop as 2. And the question becomes, is that what you really want? Now, most cities, having said that, do exactly that. They say, unless you specifically applied for what they call vested rights, then it reverts back. It can be 1 year, it can be 2 years, unless you continue to apply for extensions. So, I'm not a planner, that there must be some reason they all do it. I've seen the other side of it too. So you would just want to think about the consequences of putting something like that in the code.
So
good question.
in terms of the comprehensive plan, and it would probably be something applicable citywide eventually, but right now we're considering this central area. we would, I guess what we're considering is some sort of clause that from this point forward is going to cause or allow the possibility based on time or based on changes in the neighborhood maybe for an approval to expire or to revert. And 2 years has been mentioned. It's, I think, did you say that was from Oregon, or is that?
That was from Oregon.
That's from Oregon. And that was then at a municipal level.
As Kurt said, 2 years at this point,
May not be long
Yeah,
enough.
this time
Might not be long
2
enough.
years is not.
But if
Right.
they have the ability to extend that
Right.
with ease, then I think that's
Yeah.
a reasonable timeframe. My question perhaps is, could the city or the planning commission extend it themselves rather than let it revert back?
It would be, it's always upon the applicant to come in. I mean, I suppose under the code, we could draft it that way. I mean, we would have to give notice to the applicant. They would have to have an opportunity to
It
come in.
gets,
and
it
be
gets
heard.
really, it gets really,
You'd have to do it at a public
Touchy.
hearing, so
my
to do
comments,
something.
you leave it, if the applicant asks for it and they get their zoning and that they don't follow through, it's really their due diligence on their part to, to be apprised of what they're, what they can do and what they can't do. And if, they come out at the end of the 2 years and they either forget or don't or whatever, or they do, I mean, those are their options.
What if it doesn't, I have no idea if this makes any sense, as most of the things I say. What if it isn't that it necessarily reverts or expires, but that it becomes subject to review? And is that too vague? So that Planning Commission can say, okay, it's been 2 years, we don't want to review that, or we do.
I mean, whatever you do, it just have to be subject to, I mean, because of the due process issues, you just have to have a notice, an opportunity to be heard. You'd have to cure anything at a public hearing. So you just have to have an opportunity for that to happen. So I don't think it could be done just, I feel like, hey, Dennis, what's going on Marathon? Let's review that one. I mean, everybody'd have to be treated the same. So you'd have to have it written in.
So your policy is that it is, after 2 years, it becomes subject to review if.
Well, it's not a policy, it'd be regulation.
Yes.
It'd be regulation, it wouldn't be a policy.
You'd have to write it into code.
It'd be a code.
Okay, so I do want to get back to the comprehensive plan, but what do we want to do in the comprehensive plan about that? Do we want?
I think
you just make a recommendation essentially to
Yeah.
the council that,
I think Suzanne and I have enough, or excuse me, Sergey and I think have enough information, we can put something together. Probably.
Okay.
And then you can review it, and we'll see if you have to agree or disagree. On the other three, the TIZ, the V5, the CA, TIZ, I think we've got pretty good direction on that one in terms of concerns about the area that was pretty arbitrary when it was first designated in terms of what the area was, a half-mile radius. Doesn't make sense necessarily in terms of actual travel time, walking time, bicycling time, driving time, anything else. So there's a more logical boundary out there probably that could be applied to the TIZ.
They want to, I don't know, I was just wondering, and this would have to probably be amendment also again to the zoning code, but, because right now the zoning code actually, the TIZ requirements apply to any property that has any part of their property touching the TIZ. I mean, it can be this much, and which is, I mean, like Woodlawn Shopping Center, for instance, has a small corner touching it, and that, therefore, the TIZ applies to that, which doesn't make any sense. So I don't know if they might want to consider like a percentage of the property or something like that instead of.
I would even entertain that TIZ, the only reason why I really see that we kind of get involved in the TIZ is so that the Planning Commission can review it. I mean, that's the bottom line, in my opinion. So my comment is, why don't you just call out the areas you want the Planning Commission to see under any circumstance and call it good?
It actually gives you more flexibility, and it also gives you more opportunity for review too. So it's like a PUD in terms of kind of that's required.
And there's a TIZ down at the mineral station, which
Right.
doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. So that's just my comments on those things.
Okay. That one I think I feel fairly comfortable with, and I like boundary. I think we understand the B5. We'll have more discussion on that next time when we look at the ordinance that you guys prepared. The CA, I think we still need some direction on the R5, excuse me. Yeah, R5, sorry. B2 is the one that we're talking about. Yeah, B2 we want to talk about in terms of the west end of Main Street. We really haven't talked a lot about that. The B2 and the CA probably together, the list of uses is something I think that we as staff have found to be somewhat problematic. In some cases, the CA is too limited, and the B5, the B2 is probably not limited enough in some cases. So it's something we need some direction on, I think, in the plan. Are we comfortable with the B2 and the boundaries, or the list of uses in that, and the CA as well? And maybe just a general direction that it needs to be reviewed for that list of uses to meet the vision of the plan or something to that extent. But Jan, thoughts in terms of the CA or the issues you've seen over the years, or the B2? The one that comes to mind for me was the winery. You wanted to go in on Main
Well,
Street.
it's funny because
It seems like a great use, but
the CA district allows some types of manufacturing,
right.
whereas the B2 doesn't allow that.
Right.
So it's sort of, which is odd, but that's just how it's written.
I guess my recommendation would be quite simply, CA seems to be the most established zoning category that seems to work, and whatever you like out of the B2, you throw into the CA and get rid of the B2 totally.
Downtown.
Yeah.
Downtown.
And the B2 allows automotive uses that the CA
It allows
district
automotive
doesn't.
uses, and that's been an issue historically, I think.
Well, if
And
if
yet,
it turns out to be what's the term I want to say? If it turns out to be CA and it's no longer a use under CA, then it's grandfathered in.
The non-conforming use.
Non-conforming use, and then they change it, and then it goes to the CA, period.
the limitation with the non-conforming is, of course, you can't expand. And so if you have a healthy business that wants to expand,
Well, you
yeah.
can't expand, and then you got to deal with if it burns down, and I,
You
But
might
you know,
think-
the bottom line is, I don't know if I want to see more BA in the downtown area, to be quite honest with you. Again,
Yeah, I think
that's
it's
a
something, I
fundamental
think
thought process.
something that needs to be
Well,
thought about
the-
in some detail at some
and
point
there's
in terms of,
well,
yeah.
and there's you've got a long-established use downtown that's in that B2 area that I don't know
Nobody's
how.
going to say anything against it.
I know, but if their property burns and they lose their right for that use there, I just.
But we're a long ways from getting it to be CA. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I guess, again, I look at this map and I see the whole red area. I see all of that red area to be solidly CA. It's just the way I look at it based upon what's out there. And if you're having troubles or hiccups with the B2, create a proposal that makes sense, and then at least let us look at it. Doesn't mean it's going to be approved, doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere for all I know, but the bottom line is at least we're looking at it.
And I don't know if there's any way you could make provisions for certain, uses which have been well-established and can't expand. I don't know, something like that, but it's good discussion that
Yeah,
has to
you
be
make
had.
them a use by special review.
Possible, yeah.
Go back to one thing that Dan brought up was, is there something that would, a percentage for the TIZ that we could declare, if 75% or more of the property is in the TIZ, then all of it is, otherwise it is excluded? I don't know what percentage would make sense, but
Yeah, and I don't know if we have to come up with a number.
is it 51? Is that?
That works for me.
But I think we just need to give some general direction in terms of that needs to be reviewed and decided, and that you kind of lean towards predominance or majority, whatever it might be. That has to be.
75?
So, yeah.
I guess my thinking of higher than 51 is that that's going to occur at the very margin of this circle, which was kind of arbitrary anyway. And maybe that solves it 75%. Okay, you're really not that close to the center, to the light rail station, so
Or
go
you
ahead
could
and
just,
out of it.
or you could just color it without it being a circle at all and saying, these are the properties that are in, period.
Well,
And let it go at that.
and base that on being all in or all out.
Yeah,
But-
you can do
but
that. I mean,
you have the one.
I think we're playing too much with the circle stuff.
Well, and that's what we're trying to get away from. I guess what I'm asking is if it's 75% in the TIZ at that outer edge, then I'd say that's enough. You're actually part of the TIZ, and anything else less than 75%, you're cut loose from that. But
Without looking at a map, I'd be somewhat, I guess my comment would be quite simple. I kind of even concerned that we go too much beyond east of
the depression.
the railroad, to be quite honest with you, with the TIS. I mean, I don't really anticipate seeing too many things going over there that I'm going to see are going to be.
We have Littleton Station, and we'll have the sheriff's site. and,
Say along Littleton Boulevard.
yeah,
some
a little bit.
potential. And the Sternberg building, I suppose, there was some
Generally not much.
discussion of that last time. Well, so commissioners, Linda.
Just real quick, who put the circle together for the TIS? Is that something that is done through the state, or is it done through?
Oh, the city did that.
The city did
that
that.
when they adopted that ordinance way back in like 2000 or whatever.
Yeah, it's
And it's
anticipation
kind
of
of
light
funny
rail station
because it's
opening.
measured to the center of the platform, and then the platform itself actually gets bigger, so.
So the center's moved.
It's been moved, and, it's, I mean, I personally technically wouldn't be opposed to a recommendation that you actually define properties, like Julio was saying, that makes sense versus this.
In terms of a
circle.
walking distance, your time, you can actually go out and actually test it now in terms of, what, because Alexion came in and still sees themselves as very much oriented towards the light rail station, and they're outside the
But they're
TIC.
outside the
You feel like they're walkable to it. Other areas that are in it just don't feel connected to it, so it doesn't make sense, whereas I think that's, now that it's here, we really can kind of figure out, what makes sense, so.
And I guess my recommendation from a comp plan point of view is that city staff look at the TIS and think about revising it in some logical form. That would be my recommendation as
Yeah,
part of
something general like that.
That's really what we're looking for is,
That's
I
what
mean,
I'm saying.
if you were all sitting here saying we like it just the way it is, then we'd say, okay, fine. But if you think that it needs some change, it probably requires somebody to take a hard look at it and come up with a proposal.
Why don't you give us some pros and cons on Julio's suggestion that it just be defined at the outside edge by certain properties, and maybe some criteria, I guess there's 3 categories, some criteria to revise it, looking at walkability, time.
I agree with that. I think we need to create criteria for what we want this area to be.
Good.
And I think that's a lot better than just a half-mile circle. And so I guess I totally agree. And as far as I'm concerned, whoever can think of more criteria for that, establishing that, more,
But there are some pretty good national standards, really, I think, that
well,
we
then
use to
go
pull
with
in.
it.
So,
You guys come up with it and
Sure.
let us know what they are, and let's see if we.
I don't know if they're national, but they're commonly used.
And I know this isn't downtown, but, I would, as staff, support elimination of the TIS down on the mineral station, because most of what's down there, single-family residential, doesn't apply anyway. Others down there, zone PD, which doesn't apply. And this is an example of why I think it's kind of silly down there, is when Carson Nature Center did an expansion to the solar classroom, they had to do a PD overlay. And that wasn't the purpose for that, so, because that's zone A1, so, I mean, it's just sort of, I think now that we've had this on the books for a while, it doesn't make sense anymore.
Maybe those criteria end up being applicable to both of the
Yeah.
TIZ areas, and that would solve that.
Or eliminate the one down south, because I'm trying to think, most of the property down there is either single-family or zone PD, so it's already excluded from the TIS requirements. Probably the only property I can think of down there that's in the TIS would be Brose property, that's the horse.
What's the
Enter,
RTD's?
the
Our-
Enter property?
Well, that's PD.
And
And the only,
the RTD parking lots are PD
that's
as well?
PD. The only straight zone district down there that's not single family is the horse property. And to do anything on that property, they're going to have to rezone anyway. So,
Well, and
you know.
and it's not exactly transit
no,
accessible.
it isn't. So I just,
Different kind of transit.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, we haven't paid much attention to, yeah. Okay, so
The sidewalks, I think we feel pretty good about. I think we've had that discussion. Sidewalk wasn't part. Continuous sidewalk was the other thing, just in terms of, is it a priority that we have continuous sidewalk? It's something that's the pedestrian plan's going to get into. You want to talk a little bit about stuff the suitcase, Sarah Jane, in terms of?
Yeah, I'm sure that everybody's wondering what that is. Dennis and I were talking about, should we try to pair Alamo with Maine and sort of make it the same thing? And I've heard this discussion even tonight around here. And from an urban design point of view, whenever I work in a downtown, I say, find where your energy line is, find where the most active uses are, and that's the suitcase, and then stuff it with more, because that's where you're going to get all of your activity. My personal feeling is if you artificially, let's say, go over to Alamo and try to make it more like Maine, you're going to drain Maine of its activity. So I think that just as a philosophy, let's say, that Maine is the major energy line. Maine is the one that we're going to put all of our continued energy into until there's a reason not to, until somebody comes up maybe with a use that they want, and they want to change the character, and they have the money and the time and the economy is right. I wouldn't be spending a whole lot of time on Alamo at this point.
map that Julio keeps referring to has the red extending all around
Yeah.
Elm.
That's right. But I'm talking about, the yellow line, really, more than the red. In other words, I think that red is uses like Main Street and support Main Street, but it's not the same as Main Street. That you want to keep your focus pretty clearly on Main Street. It's very nice to go out to Main Street and see all those pedestrians, and if there were twice as many, it would be even nicer.
I think what we've heard supports that approach. Alamo has its own historic character that's different from Main Street, and I haven't really heard much that supports any sort of mimicking of the Main Street density or types of uses or anything else. I think it's a good complement, in my opinion,
Right.
to what Main Street provides. So.
But I wouldn't want to, I guess, in order for that red to really flourish, and it's going to be supportive, and I don't have a problem with that terminology, but again, I think we need to have some thought criteria for what that really means for Alamo as well. Because I do see an evolution occurring along Alamo, because you have the various cross streets between Rapp and Nevada, and
Right.
forget the, all the way to Prince, and they're developing. I mean, you can start to see the migration, if you will, and I wouldn't want to, I would rather keep the incentive going even for the Alamo area.
Well, and I see that as supportive use. It's almost like it's, if you look at the streets, it's like a ladder with those cross streets there. And the cross streets are sort of off Broadway,
Right.
but they're very supportive of that. I mean, I think one of the really nice places in Littleton, right off of Main Street, that is very supportive of Main Street, and yet it's better that it's off Main Street, is it Jaja's, the French?
Yes.
I mean, that's perfect. And to encourage that kind of stuff on
That
those,
is the same thing. It's just-
yeah, on those ladder streets, so that somebody who wants to come downtown, and they might not want something that has a big bar and it's loud and so forth, but they still want to be in the activity of downtown, they have those other options. And the more, the better.
Let me offer a contrary view. with all the student activity, maybe it's not a different possibility. With all the student activity, that's more likely to involve development along Alamo and be supportive, I guess, of businesses along Alamo than any kind of development extending, say, even down in the, we were talking about the B2, somewhat further remote, or in the R5. You have to look at one area that is, if you say, look, something's going to change if we're going to have more businesses and more energy, is it going to go into the R5 area with more professional offices, or do we want to see it along Alamo and try to draw those students over, even if it's to a loud bar after finals?
I'm sure you've never done that.
Never.
No.
Never went to finals.
Well, you know, one of the things along those very same lines, and I keep looking over your shoulder, and from my standpoint, from the comp plan, you know, without really scrutinizing that plan that talks about the downtown framework, I really like to see us adopt something either that or something very similar to that, maybe some tweaking a little bit here and there. I feel more comfortable with what I'm seeing there, and it's been up there now for quite a while. And there's nothing up there that I really have off the top of my head without getting really close and personal to it that really jumps up and gives me a bad taste in my mouth when I look at it. I think it incorporates all the things that we've been talking about on this paper and virtually for a long time now. And I like the graphic of it. It says a lot without hitting you over the head with it.
Right.
The more you're willing to open your mind, the more you see. And I think that's the beauty of it. And for me, that I feel real good as incorporating that as part of our quote comp plan.
Yeah. We probably will put a storyline to all of the little blobs that lead up to it so that it will work for you and have it incorporated as a graphic in the comp plan.
Because a lot of our conversation is really taken up right there.
Yeah.
Next thing, downtown's urban design framework contained as an asset to preserve. Sergey, you want to talk about that a little bit too?
Sure. It seems to me, we've talked about downtown being contained by Santa Fe and the railroad, Bellevue, and the college to the south, and that's a real asset, and we want to keep downtown contained, but link it to the surrounding areas. And I just wanted to test that with you because that's the kind of language that we're using, and I never actually heard that all put together like that, and I just wanted to make sure that I was on the right page, and that's what you want to have included in the plan.
I'm in agreement with what you're saying. I think we said it in many other ways.
Yeah.
We said the same thing, we just didn't say it the same way.
Okay.
Good.
I think the links, as I would ruminate about it, is that more pedestrian and bicycle links, particularly to the downtown, to get some of the neighborhoods involved. And
particularly to the east.
Yeah. We probably aren't going to add, widen a street or make another street a major thoroughfare down there. So that's where we get into the pedestrian and bicycle traffic.
Well, and part of that was, for a downtown of your size, you have basically two parks. But if you link to the parks that are directly outside, you borrow all of that land for the downtown residents or people who are in downtown. And vice versa, you invite people who are using those public spaces to use them.
That answers.
That's good.
I also tend to agree with what David had to say about the downtown urban design framework, that there's the main street, the downtown core area that has its own character, and that we can be deliberate, I think, about identifying areas outside that shouldn't be the same. It shouldn't be that faux
Right.
character. And that's the opportunity for perhaps a different type of development. And that urban design framework to me is a lot about what the building massing and quality of design, character, relationship to the street, all that.
I forgot to bring David's points up.
Next one is just really terminology, I think. Main Street District or Downtown Core, we were just kind of toying with the names. The Main Street District is kind of what we're looking at in terms of that whole red area. Downtown Core, we weren't sure which resonated better. As I recall,
Yeah.
the same area.
It's the same area, it's just an option for a name change, that's all.
What's the name that's used, one of the historic shopping districts, is that what they're called? Did they use the word historic, or did they use downtown, or?
Oh, for the,
There's
we call them the original shopping districts.
Okay. Well, I was hoping to draw off of that.
Nevada and Golden and Littleton and Boulder, right?
Because they, market themselves as
Historic.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think the marketing ended up being historic, but I think they called themselves the originals.
original.
I think, Dennis, that one of the reasons that you liked the Main Street District is it was just more specific.
Yeah. it's very
I mean,
specific.
everybody has a downtown core,
Main Street, I think, resonates with
Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, so,
And the term core to me is pretty vague.
yeah.
What is a core? I mean, a core could be anything.
Technical jargon. I like.
And your problem is, that's,
So I hear the Main Street District is the one that people support more.
If it's the Big Apple, the
They
core is
disagree.
seedy, right?
yeah.
Okay. This one is, historical presence can be altered if there's an opportunity to improve the pedestrian environment. And it kind of gets, how do you weigh that? Is that something we want to talk about? And what we're talking about particularly is the setbacks, and it gets into the design guidelines that we have now, design standards and guidelines, where there's a priority given to creating that line along the street for the storefronts. And if we have a few businesses that step back, particularly on the west end, I think, and historically they've been that way. They've been that way for a long time. And yet, there's a general feeling that if you actually bring a new building, if they were to redevelop that site, bring it up to the sidewalk, it actually improves the pedestrian scale and the character and the comfort level. And so I guess just if comp plan seems like an appropriate place to have some kind of direction on that. Is that a possibility? Should it be weighed? Is there a priority that should be giving to that, one over the other in those cases?
Do we know what the historical precedent is there, or are we guessing?
I think we actually know pretty well. I mean, it's pretty easy to track on most of those, particularly on the west end. And there may be some exceptions. There may be some that had buildings up to the street at one point. The one on the south side of the street, for example, I think may have had a building up on that corner. It may have had something that went up there and was replaced later with something it didn't. The ones on the north side, for far distant, it may originally have had something up to the street. Boy, it's been a long time since they did. So,
Historical structures, are they designated historic?
no, they're not. No, yes, actually, one of them is.
The one next to Merle's.
The one next to Merle's is
That
designated
main-
structure.
Yeah.
And it has parking up front. So,
West of Merle's. It has parking in front, yeah. That was an old grocery store. Right?
that was the grocery store at one point, yeah, parking up front.
But there was something there before that was at the street.
Right. No, well, not that we know, not that I'm aware of at least, but the grocery store is there a long time, so. And one of the things that the Historic Preservation Board has in their work program is to look at downtown as they're doing the design guidelines and identify a period of significance. So they can say, okay, it was 1942, it was 1924, it was 1891. What was it that actually is the period they're going to build to? So then you can actually kind of answer those questions. But I think before they do that, it'd still be good to, do you have a sense of priority? Is it more important to have that pedestrian feel, or is it more important to, or do you want to just leave it out? You can leave it out too, and just leave it up to individual circumstances. Discussions for each case.
And I think it's important to define what the pedestrian environment, what is the overall goal that you want, rather than,
Right.
because that definition of what a good pedestrian environment, it can change over time. So if we were a little bit more concise as to the definition.
And we've been working, we're trying to include that, elements of that at least, and see if everybody agrees with that or not. But we're trying to say, hey, here's what we think, from what we've heard, is included in Littleton's pedestrian environment. What's comfortable for people.
I would probably, if it was me, I would probably have referred this particular comment to the Historical Preservation Board.
Okay.
So this kind of comes under their bailiwick and not so much ours.
Okay. And it's something they're going to have to deal with a little bit, I think, too, as they get to the design guidelines.
Because I don't, yeah, and that's my other note I had here. It seems more like standards and guidelines more than a comp plan issue for me.
Anybody disagree with that or want to take another approach?
Let me suggest that this did come up in the discussion on Merle's about bringing the facade up to the street.
Sure did.
And there were different opinions there. Someone said, you know, the disparity in setbacks, particularly when it's historic, not something that's changed, is refreshing. Part of the discussion was about framing the view from both west to east and east to west of the anchors on each end of Main Street. And the discussion involved, if you have those facades up there, how that framed the view. I guess, to me, it's sort of related to the Historic Preservation Board, but going one step further back, historic precedents can be altered. Well, you aren't going to alter it if it's in the historic district or it's on the list of merit. Then altering it kind of flies in the face of that whole consideration that you've said this is an important thing, and we're going to, you know, suggest that they pick up the building and move it up to the sidewalk or something like that. So that precludes that first off. And after that, if it's not in the district, it's not on the list of merit, then perhaps. And that's when we go back to the guidelines and some of the information about how long has it been like this. So there's a waffle.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think that the idea here was that you wouldn't move a historic building, obviously, or ask them to put a porch on it so it comes up to the front, but if it's being redeveloped, so therefore it wouldn't be a historic building, but it might be, or it might be a historic building. But we were specifically, I think, having the grocery store in mind when we were talking about it.
Residential development or redevelopment of downtown should be encouraged. Kind of the question was, do you want to make a general statement in terms of we're encouraging additional residential development downtown? That's kind of what we're asking about. Is that something you want to just be a very strong statement about, and does it stand out from other things? But I think it's something that would be a good thing to have in there one way or the other, I think.
This where we would include, we'd like to have a variety of style and price range available.
Yes.
Sure.
So we would like to encourage residential development that also incorporates affordable, and sometimes that might just mean higher density small, and to be included. Don't know if that.
Jenny, so you shaking your head too.
Yes, I definitely think that having more people living close to downtown is just going to encourage that activity, and it's going to allow the businesses to thrive. And if we're doing pedestrian and bicycle, I mean, everything's going to all work together. I think better if you can get more people that are living in close proximity to our main street.
What are we going to do to encourage?
Well, one of the things that we talked about is looking at the time is money thing, you know, when you have so many reviews to go through and so forth, looking at all like if you do I'm not the subject expert here, so I'm going to turn this over to Dennis. But if you're looking at how many reviews and how often it comes up, maybe we can work with the review process to try to make it quicker. If you include so many residential units, or something like that.
Looking at Jan.
We're looking at.
See if that's possible. Not that she needs to speed up.
What? Sorry?
You think there's even thing you need to.
Well, we have 500 planners, that are available on hand to do all that.
I'd like to see us be more specific on how we're going to encourage.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and we do have some specific things in there, but I guess before we sit down and try to figure out how, what are the 5 things that we can do to encourage residential, if you don't want residential as something that is, you're trying to encourage above other things, then we don't want to go through the brain damage of trying to figure out.
One of the things that some cities do, Kurt, is not do anything too proactive in terms of, I think Littleton's about, we might be comfortable talking about what are available sites, what are the entitlements on those sites, putting together information packages for people. In terms
Like
of,
with the economic gardening
like
and that kind
economic
of
gardening
thing.
does. In terms of residential, really focusing on downtown, what might be available in terms of assemblages, what are the opportunities that are here. I think it's that kind of thing that sometimes is pretty effective. So that we're kind of looking at that type of thing as well. So, okay.
And when we say residential development, what do we mean? Do we mean, high-density apartment buildings? I mean, the one thing I consistently hear from everybody is that we want to maintain the residential character, which is completely different from residential development or redevelopment.
But I think it's why we need, it's real careful. We need to be fairly specific in terms of what happens in the original downtown neighborhood, the R5, what happens in the rest of it. And we've been pretty clear in terms of height. We've got the density set with existing zoning. So it's pretty well set in terms of that, but that's why we really need to be, I think, go into more detail in the R5 district, particularly in terms of what we're looking for. And then if you want to revisit any of the other neighborhoods, we certainly could do that too, but we went through with the height, so that's what we'd be encouraging, was what you're recommending, I think, in terms of what seems compatible with those other areas. So. Yeah, I think that's good.
To date, an expanded GIS mapping and information. I'm not sure how that gets into the comprehensive plan.
Part of that was Chris Gibbons' comments, and also a number of commissioners who talked about GIS mapping for the analysis, for marketing, for planning, for, just overall information for the city. So that's more implementation to me.
It's implementation, it probably would lead to a consulting contract is what we'd probably end up doing, that would actually help tailor a program for us specifically, because the city's very up to date with our GIS for economic development and for the police department and for the safety folks. We're not up to date with the planning end of it at all in terms of where we are, and it's something we can continually update and keep current and get information from. So and that's what Chris was talking about too.
You could also create an agreement with the county, because we have possibilities are already. It's just a matter of creating an agreement, and you could have a lot of our GIS.
Oh, really?
Results.
Wow, fantastic. Okay.
It's not like it's impossible to do.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Other jurisdictions do that?
We've had, well, since we're kind of like the repository for everything. Right now, if you go on our, first thing I recommend is you go on our website and check out all the information we have for all the various areas, and you get everything from parcels to zoning to everything else along the way. I don't know exactly what you mean by GIS mapping, other than the fact that our mapping department can do it for anywhere in the county.
Okay. Create a downtown parking management plan. I think we talked about that already. We'll be talking about something fairly specific as the plan comes forward, but at the comp plan level, we'd just be talking about that as an implementation step. So it seems useful to have.
We talked about elements, fees in lieu of providing parking, I think was one of them. But what was the question there? The question from you was, do we want
Do we want to have a recommendation that talks about creating a parking management plan itself?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, good, good.
Now bring up lighting,
Okay, well, it's coming, it's coming.
Oh, we've got one more.
and I'll say the same thing.
Vehicles will not dominate the street environment, and that includes parking, which means that parking really should be kind of secondary, should not be as visible to the, it comes up partially to the parking management plan in terms of how do you provide it, where do you provide it, the scale at which you provide it, certain locations. But the thought is that the street really is, we accommodate vehicles, but it's the street environment really is primary.
And it really had to do with large surface parking lots, too. You know, that that you don't want to, while you're trying to accommodate parking, kill the very thing that people are trying to get to, basically.
Does complete streets apply right there as far
I
as?
think there's two issues here. One is addressed by complete streets. It's the right balance of
Right.
vehicular use versus other types of uses. But the other one is that we shouldn't discourage parking on the streets
No,
because
no.
that's a good urban
Yeah.
design approach, is parallel
Well,
parking.
and it's funny, when I think of, if I were to shut my eyes and think of Main Street, I'm looking at the building fronts. I'm not, you know, the stuff going by is, I am separated from the traffic, so I feel very safe from the moving cars. And while there may be a whole bunch of them, my focus is on the streets. And that's not true in a lot of cities where, you know, they either don't have the nice building fronts to look at, or they're pulled back and they have parking in front of them, which is not a good thing, so, no.
I have a concern about just the statement itself is troubling to me. Where it says vehicles will not dominate the street. You know, first thing that comes to my mind, I think of Main Street when you're saying that. If you're talking about some other street, I need to know what you're talking about, because this is what kind of I think about when I'm thinking about this area. And yet, you know, vehicle traffic is literally the cause and effect for downtown, if you will.
Right.
And so I guess I have the way this is kind of coming across to me, you know, you say, well, not dominate, you know, and yet I'm not, I think someday in the future, maybe the concept of not dominating the street may take a stronger form, but I don't see us getting rid of street parking
No.
or all that.
That's not what it's.
No,
Yeah, so
that's what.
we need to rewrite this, I think,
See,
yeah.
that hurts.
Sure.
Whatever statement you're trying to come up with, whatever
absolutely.
thought you have,
Yeah, we need another word for street.
it just
'Cause
it's
it's the
doesn't.
environment, I think.
I don't
yeah.
know what it is. It
Use
just
that,
doesn't
right.
work for me.
Should not dominate
And if you want to
downtown.
be specific, I think you need to be specific.
Yeah.
If you're talking about Main Street, then let's just say it's on Main Street.
Okay.
Well, there is an aspect of that, too, that could be applied to those adjacent surface lots that impact the street environment where you have them. There's not many on Main Street, but there's other places where you have large expanses, and other cities have treated those with screening requirements or, you know, setbacks, buffers, that type of thing. And I think that is relevant to this topic.
Yeah.
Our design guidelines right now address them that way. So even if you have a new one going in or redevelopment, you know, then you can apply those
Well,
screening and buffering.
would it be important to include something in the comp plan that supports that policy, backs it up?
I think we saw that somewhat with this parking lot out here. We talked about the landscaping. David said, you know, if we are not ready as a culture to give up vehicles, then, you know, it's, if we can and when we do, that will change the street environment. We can't force it. All right. Do you want to talk about lighting?
My comment's real simple. Create a downtown lighting management plan, period.
You guys had, there was a presentation a while back, I think it was to the HP board when I was liaison, So, sometime last year from the lighting consultant, and I think you were updating the.
We are updating the lighting ordinance itself.
Okay.
And we'll be coming back with that.
Yeah, but aren't you talking about street lighting?
Yeah, you're talking about street
Is that
lighting,
what
which
you're
at
talking
this
about?
point
You're
is.
talking about street lighting.
Yeah.
I'm talking about street lighting.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about the car industry and all that other stuff.
We're talking about the commercial lighting and
Right,
primarily,
which
yeah.
is different.
Right, private property.
On-lot,
Right.
on-lot lighting versus
Exactly.
public lighting.
But you're talking about street lighting, so you're talking about pedestrian lights as well as the street lights, both. Okay.
And I, certainly would like to see a differentiation between commercial areas and residential.
Okay.
I'd suggest if everyone can drive by Nevada Place on their way home tonight and see how bright it is with those 3 Sternbergs that are out there.
I did that last time as well, and it was,
Frightening.
yeah, it was actually deplorable.
And I would say, get out of the car and walk down the street to see if it feels comfortable or too bright or too, so get a sense if you're walking down the street too. So.
Of course, you have to remember too, they're brand new.
That's true. So
And they
do-
burn off
they do
after a
burn off
while,
little bit.
but
They
they're
do.
brand new.
Yeah, no, that does.
You wouldn't like my alternative.
But it's true, lighting people keep reminding me of that, is that we put them in at first and they are much brighter, so they do burn down. So look at the old ones as well.
What's the percentage that they end up at?
Usually burns down to about
Burn down
70%.
70% of what starts.
I don't know, how many hours, number of hours.
I guess the concern
Are there
is
more planned across the street from there when the other section goes in?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. I
Oh,
have to
yeah, I
look
think
on
on
the
both sides.
plan. But actually, I think they
Servers.
were going to have more in, but they reduced them, so.
Yeah, they did read some.
Yeah, well, Charlie
very
reduced it.
inconsistent from what I can see. The lighting plan as it currently is on the ground. I don't have it, again.
Oh, yeah.
This area, the red area, is really nicely lit. I don't have an issue with it. When it starts to go north, in a lot of places on Prince, it only goes up half the block of Prince, just like the red area does, and it stops. And then now that you have the Nevada Place, which I think is appalling, they put it into a residential area, which is for residential houses, and it's really out of place because everything else around is dark.
And the funding, my understanding, Jan, and you've been involved in this, but the funding for it comes through development proposals. So as properties are redeveloped,
Well, the
that money goes
developer
into.
paid for those Sternberg
Pays for the
lights.
Sternbergs, yeah. And then I think there are some that have gone ahead and paid for them, but the block
Well,
has.
they do
Has
either
it been a
one.
large enough area,
They
public
either
service
do-
will put them in
if
until.
it's large enough area to put them in, like Nevada Place or whatever, or if they're closer to Main Street, Public Service has been requiring them the developer to pay the cost to install them with the site plan development. If it's further away from downtown, or they're only required to maybe put one in, and there's like 10 properties between them and downtown that doesn't have them in yet, then they've been paying the costs into a fund to put in at a later time.
And wait, so they have a larger mass of them going in, I think so. Like Hill Street condos, did they
I
put them in?
guess I'd like to see.
He
us
put
try
his
and
in.
have
He
something
did put his in,
that's-
okay.
It's not a plan. I hate to say it, it really isn't. Doesn't seem like it's very well thought out.
Well, the interesting thing about pedestrian lights is because so much of the streetscapes in place, you can't do a regular placing on them, a regular spacing on them. You have to actually go through and place each one depending on what's there already, in terms of where the utility lines are, where the poles are.
Where
So
the
you
trees
actually-
are.
Where the trees are, where the curb cuts are. So you place each light. It ends up being kind of irregular no matter how you do it after the fact, so.
Well, and one thing, Nevada Place, okay, you're looking at the Sternberg lights. Well, and I'll just let you know that they're not finished with their exterior lighting yet either, so you're not seeing all the light
Well,
out
that's
there
my
yet.
point.
Because they still have those little post lights to put up that are at the end of the stoops.
And I
Yeah.
saw some Sternbergs on Prince Street that's on the structure itself. That was more than enough lighting than having to put on another street light. And so you can just go right out here and go down the street as you're driving, and you'll see it. There's 2 of them on the entrance of the building.
Is that the Work Live one? Is that
I
Prince
don't know
Street
what it is.
Commons?
No, it's further down, across the street from, huh? No, it's even further down than that. It's right next to,
That's the
it's
shops at
right next to Main Street. And it only goes for that half a
Oh,
block.
Main Street,
The
oh, that
apartment
way,
building?
oh,
It's way down here.
Oh, the apartments? They're there?
They're apartments, they're a couple of stories.
Right.
And they're right on the building,
yeah.
and they're very big.
Uh-huh.
And you don't need any streetlights with them suckers out there, because they're as big as the streetlights. There's two of them right next to each other.
And that's commercial on the first floor, or retail, so.
But, you know, it's limited and it stops, and then where you have all of the apartments, it's dark. And then you go to our thing on Nevada Place, and it's bright again, and I'm going, it's very inconsistent. And I don't, you know, maybe there's a plan, and since we haven't seen one, obviously, so for 23 years, it's kind of difficult to think about it, but the point is still the same. I am very concerned, where it's residential, you don't, where it's commercial, you can. And that's, I mean, that may be simple-minded, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
Simple makes, yeah.
All right, talk more about that, I think, when we get into the R5 again.
About
I
discussion.
should get one more.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I
Jen.
think doing the pedestrian and bike master plan, I think is going to be helpful, because it's going to identify what are the main pedestrian routes. And that, I think, is going to be helpful to say, okay, these are main pedestrian routes, let's get the right pedestrian lighting along those routes. So, as well as taking into consideration what the uses are, residential and commercial. So I think those are going to work in tandem with each other.
This also plays into the sustainability objectives, because I could see a goal or a policy here as part of the comp plan that recommends a new lighting master plan for the central area that addresses a sort of a hierarchy similar to the pedestrian bike, and also with a special emphasis on energy savings and the right color and quality and type of lighting throughout, even looking at some of the existing facilities that are out there. I think, you know, that could be part of this plan, is that goal.
About 3 minutes, so.
Okay, I'll go real quickly here.
Take your time.
Two things. I've got one correction to make, of course. Tomorrow night, City Council, City Council District 4, which is Debbie's district, will be meeting next door, 7 o'clock. If you're interested, please come. And if we're going to be talking about South Santa Fe, our next planning effort, that might be a good opportunity to hear some of the comments from the neighborhood. On Wednesday night this week, so we've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday night, the 29th, in this room, the Historic Preservation Board is going to be talking about their design guidelines for historic structures. And I think it would be a good opportunity, again, to get an overview. Nori Winter, who's their consultant, will be talking about here's how design guidelines work for historic structures. Here's a possible outline for what they might look like. There's an opportunity for public input, and your comments will be invited in terms of how you feel about how we're proceeding. And then our next meeting is October 11th. I've got it down as a study session. Jan reminded me we actually have a regular meeting that night that we'll be talking about floodplains. So a big issue that may take most of the meeting, so we may not actually get to study session. We'll see. And then regular meeting again on the 25th, I believe, too, possibly. That may be a study session, but we're anticipating we're going to get something through by the 25th. So we'll see. You think it's going to happen?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it'll be ready. It's a condition. It goes to DRC on the 7th, so I'm not sure.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to make either of those next two meetings, the 11th or the 25th. I have meetings out of town for work, so I'll try to get comments back ahead on any study session items.
Okay, super. The other thing we talked about a little bit about last time, and when we have a case coming up, not the one that's coming up, not the floodplain regulations, but the next case, Jen has some ideas in terms of how to respond to the concerns that we had in terms of identifying what are in the purview of the Planning Commission, what's in the purview of public services, and kind of how do we get that discussion going in terms of what is appropriate to put in the planning effort and to discuss, and just a heads up to everybody in terms of what's out there, what the issues are. You want to talk a little bit about that just briefly?
Well, I think the question came up more regarding PD overlays.
Right.
And it can affect conditional uses as well, because they oftentimes have a site development plan, and it relating back kind of to the last PD overlay you all reviewed for the dental office. and having some clarification about, well, there's the criteria that the Planning Commission uses and what are actually site plan issues that are, not really the Planning Commission's criteria, like at this point, without it being in the comp plan, streetlights or undergrounding overheads or something like that. And some, I think Norma asked about maybe having it spelled out on the PD overlay plan itself. I had suggested another way to do it, only because once the PD overlay plan is approved and it's recorded, it's a historical document that's picked up by title companies for entitlements and also looked at by future planners to see what's approved for that property and the requirements. And also it gets a little mucky when you have a lot of other text on those plans that really are kind of irrelevant at the time it's recorded. So I had suggested, and I haven't drafted one up, I was going to do a little mock one for you guys. I haven't had time to do that yet, but I suggested either addressing it in the staff report at the beginning of the staff report, or in some kind of, I'm kind of thinking in my head, maybe like in a chart form or something like that that's easy to follow, or making that same type of thing an attachment in the staff report. And those are just my suggestions over actually putting that on the PD overlay itself. And I know it gets a little bit confusing for y'all because you do have a site plan with that PD overlay, although it's meant to be an illustrative plan, just mainly so you're not sitting here trying to review something in a vacuum that's just showing you a bubble of a property. Of course, you do need to kind of see what you're looking at and what it relates to, but there are certain technical elements of that site plan that aren't the Planning Commission's purview, and that I understand the confusion. And that same thing comes up with some conditional uses too as well. So, but that's what I.
So when we anticipate something coming, maybe on the 25th, we actually might have something we could use it.
Have just a sample one to show you as to if you like it in that format.
I was saying the 25th.
Oh, the 25th, the conditional use.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be one. Actually, that conditional use is, and I can tell you because it's on the website. It would be an expansion of an existing daycare that received conditional use approval back in 1987. That's located at the shopping center at Platte Canyon and Bowles. It's called Graham's Creative Kids, and he's looking to expand his floor area within the shopping center. So it actually won't be a building addition itself or anything like that. But that's an existing site, and we did just recently pass an amendment to conditional uses to allow a sketch plan as part of that application because it is an existing development, So, just as an example, something like that. I mean, you guys won't be looking at drainage issues. You're going to be looking at the criteria for conditional use for a daycare center, and so what comments I get back from staff that, because engineering will always give you technical comments back that are more site plan related and really don't have anything to do with the use itself. So that would be a good example of one that would be simple, or actually to start that, format of some.
Give us a chance to look it over and consider if that's an improvement, or, it's sort of a delivery of information we're trying to.
Right, and it's going to vary on each case, so it would be sort of helpful information for you all.
Right, we ran a couple minutes long, but I think that was good. Thank you, Jan. You get a lot of experience with that. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Anyone? Everybody? And I heard it. All right. We are.